Hello everyone, it's David again, in with Season 2 of Babylon 5, Episode 16, In the Shadows of Zahadum. Quite a bit of history lessons on this one. Really good one if you want to investigate the background of Babylon 5's religion or dogma, I guess. The history of the Babylon 5 universe. Anyway, starts off with Zach complaining about Narn refugees flooding Babylon 5, and he's like, look, you got to give us some more discretion as to who gets put in the line to go to MedLab and who gets put on the next transport out here. So Michael Garibaldi says, I'll go talk with Captain Sheridan about it. We zip in one of the more infamous memes. If you see me stretching my arm and doing weird things, I have a cat here who's trying to attack my fingers. Anyway, Mr. Warden talks with Veer, and he says, well, what do you want? And probably one of the most memed things in all of Babylon 5. He says, I'd like to cut off your head and stick it on a pike as a warning to the next generations that some favors come with too high a price. I would look up into your lifeless eyes like this, and I would wave. Can you and your associates arrange that for me, Mr. Morden? So, Veer's grin while he's going like this, heavily memmed in the Babylon 5 universe. We zip on in, and Michael Garibaldi walks in on Sheridan. Sheridan is just by happenstance going through his wife's stuff. His deceased wife, though he thinks it's deceased, but we all know she ain't really deceased. But anyway, and Michael Garibaldi notices the Icarus on his, VidCon. He's, can I take a look at that? And he says, sure, go right ahead. And he's bipping through, and he's like, hey, I know this guy. This guy here, and he goes, no, he was killed on the Icarus when it got lost X number of years ago. And he's like, no, Captain, you understand. I've just seen him recently. He checks his logs, and sure enough, he checked himself in 2 days earlier, but oops, hadn't checked himself out. So he is still on board Babylon 5. And we cue into the entrance. The only real actor of note here is Alex Hyde White. I should say, or the core cast, but he plays Pierce Maccabee, who is agent of Ministry of Peace. And he's 62. He's London, UK. He's 5'11" or 1.8 meters. Though he grew up in Palm Springs, California. He's been in numerous shows like the original Battlestar Galactica, as well as Buck Rogers. And he did a 1994 iteration of the Fantastic Four. Didn't get a lot of money and stuff like that. A lot of people say that the only reason Marvel Studios, or whoever did it, the only reason that they did it is to just retain the copyright rights to it. Because I think you have, like every 25 years or something, you have to re-updo the copyrights. Anyway, Pierce Maccabee from the Ministry of Peace wants to do a presentation tomorrow. We zip on in, and this is the nice thing about military health care. Is what's going to happen here in this next scene is Dr. Franklin hasn't slept in 36 hours. Ivanov orders him to sleep and to eat. She said, you're going to go to your, report to your quarters, minimum 6 hours of sleep, and then I am going to join you in the Zocalo or wherever, and we're going to have a meal together. Because he said he had been using stims, and as we all know now, Dr. Franklin will develop a huge addiction to stims. And this is kind of the starting down that little slippery slope. We can say, oh, I do it for my patients, or I'm doing it to stay awake, or I'm doing it to... And, we get that. The reason why I mention the military is because I can tell you, as working as a nurse in a hospital, I've seen many times where doctors have working on next to zero sleep in obscene amounts of days. Uh, not been on vacation. One doctor hadn't been on in over 2 years, and she literally collapsed on the floor in the bathroom, in the patient's one of the patient's bathrooms, because she was so exhausted and she was battling the flu, and you know no one could do anything about it. In the military, the nurses, some of them actually do outrank the doctors. Some of When I did military health at my university, we were right by a Madigan Army hospital, and every once in a while we would get a really difficult uh, um, tech and stuff like that, because they have who would just tease us for being students and things like that. Well, our instructors, a lot of them were retired colonels from the military, and they would basically get right up in their face and say, specialist, do you have a problem? And it is, I guess, not very often, but there are times when nurses will give doctors direct orders because they outrank them. And I could imagine a situation like this. I can't tell you how many times where I've wanted a doctor to take, even 12 hours off just to, de-stress, play some video games, crawl into bed. And that same doctor, by the way, that collapsed on the floor, ended up killing one of her friends inadvertently. I'll post the article if I think I posted it earlier, and I'll post it again. About this is what happens when you don't have enough sleep, when you don't have enough me time, as we like to say. You end up, just terrible mistakes. And sure enough, Dr. Franklin is in store for some, we know, later on in the series. Mr. Morgan wants to leave, but he's taken instead to see Captain Sheridan about the Icarus. Captain Sheridan starts really to interrogate him quite aggressively. We zip on over, and as Dr. Franklin's having his dinner date with his so-called dinner date, not a romantic date, with Ivanova, he said, "Yeah, it was good. I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow," and they start talking a little bit about religion and about people, what happens when they are, in the actual process of dying. And there is, I think JMS did do some really good homework. A lot of what they talk about when people look at you, but they're looking past you into, the next dimension or whatever, into heaven or that bright gate that people talk about walking through in near-death experiences. That's exactly kind of what it looks like. I mean, when I had patients, and I know they're going really quickly when I see that. And so when I was in the nursing home, I would pick up the phone immediately and call the family in and say, "You need to come in here. Grandma's not much longer for this lifetime, and you need to come say your final goodbyes, if that's important to you." So, anyways, we learned a little bit about Dr. Franklin's. It's one of those syncretic kind of, what they call syncretic, I guess, religions. It kind of borrows a little bit from here and there and everywhere. So, we go in, and Captain Sheridan is still at Mr. Morgan over the Icarus. And we zip on in, and Mr. Pierce is giving his presentation to Talia Winters and Zach Allen. And basically, they're trying to build peace at home. Now, where have we heard slogans like that? You can't have peace with other races until we have peace at home. Until we all think, look, and act exactly the same way, we can never have peace in the galaxy. Sounds, and created the ever-loving and nefarious White Night Watch services. So Mr. Zach Allen is so happy because he gets 50 credits extra per week for services rendered. Basically, services rendered is like what the Stasi, S-T-A-S-I, in former East Germany used to do. Basically, you're paid and cajoled and sometimes terrorized into informing on your family and friends. So, like for instance, there was a real, you know, story about a famous East German rock band, and the East German rock band could never figure out how the government always knew what they were up to, and always. So when they opened up the Stasi files, this one guy went and looked at the file, found out the drummer was a member of the Stasi spy network. You know how you think you know someone, and there you go. But then again, this guy, as drummer, was probably terrorized into doing what he had done. So, but does that make it right then, or do you have to put down your moral foot at some point in time and say enough is enough? I ain't doing that. There's a good one. Michael Garibaldi and Sheridan come to a heated argument over Morgan, and it's like he says, out in the real world, I kind of play it fast and loose, but when we're in here, the stuff I do, Garibaldi said, has to hold up in a court of law. And what you're doing is not ever going to hold up into any court of law. And Sheridan, if you remember, is saying that basically Mr. Morden is technically dead. And since he's technically dead, you can't violate the rights of a dead person, can you? Well, that's an interesting one. Put your answers down below. Can you? To me, and it's like Talia said, you're using the letter of the law to violate the spirit of the law. Here is a living, breathing human being, and you're trampling all over this guy's rights. For right or wrong, that's kind of what her opinion is. And Garibaldi ends up having to resign, as we all know. He gets his job back at the end of the episode, which is always good. Because I hate it when they leave little cliffhangers like this. Garibaldi get his job back. Next, Babylon 5. All of a sudden, Virkoto is asking for the release of Morden, and it's because the Centauri are, in fact, extending diplomatic immunity to him. So, of course, this gets Sheridan's hackles up, because it's like, what does this guy do, or who does he know that the Centauri are now giving him diplomatic immunity? Because Centauri don't give away things for free, as I'm sure we've all figured out. They either want money, or there's something behind them, some power or technology or whatever behind them that makes them do what they do. And so Sheridan is, hey, what has this guy done that the Centauri are willing to go to these lengths for him? So, and of course, as coming out, Ivanova, it starts to argue with Sheridan over Morgan's detention. And of course, in Ivanova, Sheridan has a much more sympathetic ear. You know, if this guy was involved in the murder of your family member, would you let him go? And she's like, no, I guess I couldn't do that. So, we go in, and Talia Winters, in one of the more memorable scenes, refuses to scan Mr. Morgan. Now, Sheridan arranges for Talia and Morden to pass each other in the hallway. And it gets to where, as they do pass each other, Talia must have had some surface scan or something that made her recoil in horror, grab her, like she's all of a sudden got this headache from hell, and she's screaming, no, no, no. And all of a sudden, for just a minute, the shadows start to kind of shimmer in as they're rushing in to protect Mr. Morden, I guess, their asset. And he quietly whispers, wait, and they kind of back off a little bit. And so Talia goes to Med Lab and ends up talking about her experience. Sheridan walks in after obviously listening and overhearing her, and she greets him by slapping him across the face. Like, you son of a bitch, you set me up for this, kind of a thing. And we all know, too, that she saw for a brief minute and she couldn't quite figure out what it is. We all know that it was the shadows themselves who were going to come in to Mr. Morden's rescue. I call him Mr. Morgan all the time. It's Morden. But sorry about that. All of a sudden is Sheridan is going out of Med Lab. All of a sudden, the two least people you would expect to find there, all of a sudden Delenn and Kosh are there, and they want Morden released. And Sheridan is like, what does this guy have that everybody wants him released? And she said, okay, we'll tell you, but once you know his secret, you will never sleep well again. Kind of thing. It's like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And the next few minutes are going to be extremely important for the timeline of Babylon 5, so I wrote extensive notes, and I'm just going to kind of read from them. She said, the greatest nightmare of our time awaits you. Starts off slowly over 1 million years ago, giving a history of the first one, and over the last 1 million years, the first ones have kind of gone away. She said some passed beyond the stars, some disappeared entirely, probably like the walkers. They're just hanging around in their nether regions of space-time, I guess. And she said not all of the first ones went away. A few stayed behind for when the shadows come again. And he's like, the shadows, who are they? And she said, well, the shadows were old when even the ancients were young. The last great war with the shadows was 10,000 years ago. It was the last time when the ancients walked openly among us. So what happens to, and I call it the Valen/Shadow War, what happens to that war of 1,000 years ago? Because we're kind of led to believe that every 1,000 years the shadows poke out, and I have always been of the opinion that they're going to vary that timeline, because it would make no sense, because the year 997 the Vorlons will just start lining up, and as soon as the shadows come out, it'll be like whack-a-mole. You just pink, year 999 and 364 days, you just know in one more day here they'll come and we just whack their head as soon as they pop up. To me, it kind of, this, or maybe they're talking about, every 1,000 years they have, but then every 10,000 years a great war happens, where all the first ones kind of come in and jump in and join the fracas. So, from what I can gather, that's kind of what has happened, is there's, a great war 10,000 years ago, then 9,000 years later, a group of Minbari, led by Valen, ended up defeating the shadows once again. She said it was Minbari and a few remaining first ones. When they had finished, and this was the Valen Shadow War I'm talking about, they all went away, all but one. And he said, Sheridan says, there's still one left, and he said, where? And Delenn looks at Kosh. And he's like, wait a minute, Kosh is the last of the, it's hitting, Sheridan what her implications are, that Kosh is one of the last of the first ones left. Last of the first ones. Wasn't that a movie somewhere? Anyway, and she says that is why Kosh can't leave his encounter suit, because he would be recognized. And Sheridan says, recognized by who? And Kosh says, everyone. So that is also heavily meant why I mention it. When he says everyone would recognize me. And she sent a message a year ago from Lanier, and the question was, have the shadows returned to Zahadu? And he said, well, what was the answer? And Kosh says, Sheridan, learn, and kind of shoots this beam of green light into Sheridan's face, evidently sharing with him what he knows, kind of a thing. Some sort of telepathy here. And it shows the Icarus landing and the Icarus's crew waking up the shadows. One of the few times that you actually see one of the shadows, the main little spider creature character. So this is one of the few times you actually get to see them up close and personal. How did Kosh get the video of the Icarus landing? Is what, did they have spy satellites overhead, or they've the Vorlons and the Shadows by this point in their Great War over 1,000,000 years have to have a horribly extensive spy network on each other. So, or were the Vorlons just looking at a really powerful telescope from way far away where the Shadows can't bother them? So, I don't know if any of you know of any of those answers. Go ahead and put them in the comments below. And she said, point blank, those who would not serve were killed. So leaving with a Sheridan with a distinct impression, Anna Sheridan would never have served him, so she was killed. We all know that that is not entirely true, is it? But of course, as we all know, the Minbari never tell you the whole truth. We're going to find out, much to Sheridan's chagrin, that Anna Sheridan is very much alive. She said, also importantly, the last time the Shadows lost is because they moved too quickly. Morden is never alone. And she basically said, look, there comes a point where we must pledge ourselves to something greater. So Sheridan's in the security office trying to ask what he should do. And he's talking with Zach about the November 14th, 1940 Coventry Blitz, where the Germans, the British had broken the Enigma machine of the Germans. They knew the planes were coming, and Churchill could have ordered an evacuation, or he could have let the raid, and of course we all know he let the raid take place, and about 14,000 people died for his secret. So we're talking about a secret kept worth billions and billions of lives. How much is this character that you really don't know about? How much is that worth to you? So Sheridan notices a strange sound. He orders the cell scanner kind of readjusted. For a brief second, he catches a glimpse of the Shadows, the actual Shadows themselves. And he said, go ahead and let the guy go. And right as Zach is going to let Mr. Morden go, it kind of ends on this creepy thing where Morden is staring directly at the security camera. And it's like he knows that, it's like he knows somehow that he is being watched, and that it's Sheridan watching him, kind of a thing, and he's getting a sick, perverse pleasure over, you gotta let me go, because if you don't, my friends here are gonna destroy every single thing you've worked to build, like that. So, just a creepy, creepy smile. At the very end, though, Sheridan goes to Kosh and says, Kosh, I don't want to learn about you or your people or about me anymore. I want to know how to beat them, because eventually I'm going to Zahadum and I'm going to bring him down. And Kosh, in his most highly memmed, I think, any Babylon 5 saying ever in the history of Babylon 5, correct me down below if I'm wrong, but he says the ever popular, if you go to Zahadum, you will die. I'm sure you all guessed that one, but I believe that is the first mention of, if you go to Zahadum, you will die. So, anyways, lots of good stuff to talk about down below. We are really super, super close to 100 subscribers. Let's get there. I'm taping this on a Saturday, so hopefully by Sunday night we'll have already been there. But as I always like to say, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.